Welcome back. Here's where you left off. World building. And what does it take, Leonard? What makes a compelling world that we love to read about? Is it about the people? Is it about the location? Is it about the magical spells? Is it about the starships? What makes a great world to you, Leonard?
What makes a great world is a world that's very realistic, and at the same time it feels like you belong to that world. I want a world that I want to be part of it. I want to dream about it. I want to be like, that is the future that I can see in 20 years. That's the world that I want to see. I want to see a world that I feel like a part of it. The world that I don't want to see is I feel like I'm trapped in this singular place that I just don't know what to do with it. That's what, in my opinion, the world should be. Now let's talk about the book.
In the world?
Let's talk about the real world.
You're talking about the real world, not a fantasy world.
Exactly. So. The real. I want to feel like, for me, we always have this discussion since day one, Derek. I mean, we even started this podcast. We always talk about what does the world feel like? What is the world that's supposed to? What world is the book's going to be portrayed into? You know, what do you feel it? And that's always been a very challenging, in my opinion, for writers to build, because they can have this elaborate world that constantly expands for every single book, but unfortunately this world is just blah, right? But you can have a world that it's so limited, but you feel like you're part of it, you're immersed to it, and you feel like it's still this tiny world that you're stuck in, but it feels like way bigger than it should be. You know, almost like a TARDIS feel to it, right? Yeah. So that's my opinion. How about you? What's your opinion about the world building here?
Well, the world needs to be a unique entity. It doesn't have to be something, it doesn't have to be magical. It doesn't have to be space driven, even though I like both of those things. And personally, that's compelling to me. And I enjoy that piece about when the world looks at it, when the writer goes into that world and gives you details about that world. What's enjoyable is when you have a compelling character and that character explores that world. There's a difference there. So if you have a good character who's exploring the interesting aspects of the world, if you have a bad character and you're not interested in that main character, even if you have the best world ever, it doesn't matter because you're just bored with the main character. So you have to have sort of a good character that is exploring that world, and as they explore that world and learn it, let's just take Harry Potter for example. It's an example a lot of people usually lean into. The advantage to Harry Potter is that the world is unique, and almost every aspect of that world is unique. Everything was created for the purpose of the magic system. In fact, you know, the magic system in there isn't necessarily the tightest magic system ever in books. However, there's so much detail to the world that you love to live in it. And a world that you love to live in is a world that's very interesting. Another great example is The Expanse. The Expanse is a world where you can see yourself living in that world and you want to live in it. Regardless of what the characters are doing, you know, the ships in there, the way that the world is built around, the politics of it, all of that is very compelling. And so when you have those aspects involved in wanting to learn more about the world, that's when you have a great world building experience, with the exception of having a world where it's sort of recycling the same stuff over and over again, where it isn't actually expanding the world. You agree?
I definitely agree with you. I do want to put in one more thing in there too. I want to talk about Game of Thrones. That's a great world to be part of, because you have this. They weren't shy to tell you, hey, we are in the middle of an island. We are an island nation, right? But different island has different kingdoms, right? And they weren't shy about telling people this is the world we live in. There's another world at the other side of the sea, the Narrow Seas, but that's a different world. But it's still part of this massive world still, right? And the good thing about that book series is they developed the whole storyline based on being just one section of this bigger world, right? And same thing for Harry Potter. Harry Potter has theoretically has two worlds. One is the Muggle world, and the other one's the magical world. And each world are combined into one bigger world, right? And they explore both sides of it, right? And that's why it's such a great it's a great experience, because in the Muggle world you feel like this is where I belong. This is where my real life is, right? But if you look at the magical world, there's a world here that I'm so intrigued about that I want to explore more, right? That's why the Harry Potter world is so compelling for readers, because you have these two worlds that's like that exist in the same time, right? And for Game of Thrones, the same thing, because you see this aspect of like this medieval feel to it. It feels very realistic, right? It feels like I know this, but you have this dragons flying around. You have this mist. You have this sort of a magical feel to it, but not really, right? That's why everyone's attracted to that, right? That world. If you look at it as well too, The Expanse. The Expanse is great because the reality of space travel is literally in our grasp. We're still a long way away from it, but it feels like it's there for us, right? But you have this part of this world that feels like it's a 1930s Western / gangster style feel to it, right? So you have the familiarity of that world that you know that you can anchor yourself to it, right? And for me, can be a great world, right?
Yeah. Is the exploration of the world more important than what you're doing in the world, though? Is that, like, for some people, it's all about the world. They're all about the exploration of the subcultures in the world. The Expanse is a great example. Some other ones might be, Expeditionary Force is a great one. I think a lot of times we sort of lean back on pieces of it, but also I think the characters are important as well. A good example of another one that I think it creates world building but doesn't really engage in it is something like Fourth Wing, where you sort of have two different worlds connected together, which is the magical dragons and then then sort of the romance side of it. So you're kind of mashing those worlds together, but the world isn't breathed out. It isn't fleshed out more. You have a sense of the characters, the underlying world, but the author doesn't really dig into the world too much beyond sort of a surface level. So when we talk about, this world building, is it necessary to go super deep into the world to make the book series really valuable to you?
That's actually a very good question, because if you look at the characters itself, in my opinion, if you look at the characters and say the characters are so well done, so well built, it's a great character. Let's just say this is like the best character you ever read, but the world that character goes into feels like this something's missing to it, right? It feels like, oh, okay, why can you fly? Can you tell me why? Why can you not walk? Why can you not? Those kind of things. Just if the main characters is so well written, but the character's world is so far fetched, it's sort of, as a reader, it's sort of like it distracts you. It distracts you to a very well written story, potentially well written story.
Let's give you a comparison. Let's take the Hunger Games and Star Wars. Both have world building in them. Both have sort of character and plot lines connected together to the world. The Hunger Games is what I would call sort of a surface world, where we don't really, we know a lot about it, but we don't go deep into the lore, the whatever. But then you have the Star Wars movies and book series that delve so deep into the lore that people can't keep it straight. I can't keep it straight. There are hundreds and hundreds of books, of Star Wars books, that you can't consume it all and keep it straight, right? Which one is it necessary to do that to enjoy the series?
You're okay. Okay, so let's look at if you're comparing the world of Hunger Games and Star Wars, right? That's what you're asking, right? If if you look at Star Wars itself, we're definitely aging ourselves. We grew up episode 4 to 6, right? And they ended up releasing 1 to 3. That's the world that we know about. That's the world, right? But George Lucas actually expanded that world based on books, novels, comic books, cartoons, you name it, even spin-offs, right? He built that world. That's what we know about it, right? So now the new generations decide, hey, let's expand this world to go more in depth. We're talking about like nailing it down to exact origins, exact character driven stuff, even minor characters like Boba Fett became this amazing character because they decided to concentrate in that character, and that character's world became bigger. So now the character's world became part of the whole Star Wars world, right? So if you do it right, you have this amazing world that you build, that everything is interconnect, right? But they're in a point now that they have one step out of place. The whole world just becomes, you're just questioning it, right? And here's a great example: Star Trek. Star Trek, from the original to next gen to DS9 to Voyager, including the cartoon version of the original, has this world. We know about this world, right? The books, all that stuff, it's there. The same thing in Star Wars, to expand that character's one minor character, to expand even more, but it still stay in the same world, right? When they redid it based on the Calvin timeline, you have this world that sort of, it literally contradicts the original world, right? And nothing matches. That's why there's a big hoopla about, why did you ruin this amazing world? Because why? You need to buy a new car, right? But now look at, if you look at Below Decks, they try to fix that, especially in the last season. It's sort of like intertwined it together. Like,
well, you're talking about TV series. We're not talking about books.
I understand. I understand that, but we're looking at the world here. We're looking at the world here, right? So the same thing for the books. If you look at, if you want to have an amazing world, you need to have a purpose. You have to stick in one world. If you start changing the world just to expand it and not relating back to the original world that you build, that world becomes chaos. You know what I mean? That's why we always have this question together, and we always have. Do you notice every time we have a conversation about a book, the first thing we talk about is the world, right? And the world,
we do tend to do that a lot.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, that if you have this magnificent, beautiful world, and you ruin it because it can be, because you want to expand it, it becomes very daunting for a reader, right? So that's why I'm saying that if you're gonna have a world, it can be a small world, but that world has to be it has to be meaningful for that character. If you have a bigger world like the Expanse, the Helldivers, or whatever, everything you read with a massive series that has a big world, you need to stay in that world. If you're expanding, it better be part of the storyline to expand that world. If you go offshoot from that world, it just becomes chaos. That's why the Harry Potter world works so well, right? Because what's her name established that world, and she stayed with that world. Same thing that's Expanse, same thing for Game of Thrones. They stayed in that world, right? So, do you agree or disagree in that one?
When it comes to the actual aspects of the world building, to me, it's more about the details. Because I used an example a long time ago where I talked about the Dresden Files, and I said, hey, this had a cool feel to it. The character was good, he was a magic guy and so forth. But the problem is that the world that the writer was building was what I call a tropic world, where every aspect we've already seen before. There wasn't sort of a unique to it. In the second book, he got into fairies and gargoyles and werewolves and all this stuff. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I didn't find the world engaging, because really all it was using those pre-established worlds. And I say worlds like a werewolf world, a fairy world, whatever those are. Those are pre-existing worlds. He brought them together, and then he just pitted them against each other, and that was the book. And to me, that would be an example of a poorly built world, because all you're doing is bringing those other tropes or whatever into a single part and using them as a conflict mechanism for your main character. Now, that's not to say the main character is bad or that it was, but it's very hard to put me off a series unless there's either repetitiveness or if there is something that is not going to bring something new. And, Harry Potter is the extreme where everything she created was unique, new from her mind, right? The Expanse is another example where everything was sort of already, we can foresee it already. You don't really have to create too much in the sense of the concepts and so forth, like space travel, starships, whatever. All that's plausible stuff that we can think of now. But when you take things that are not really related to each other and put them together and then expect the audience to do it, to me that was a bad world building to me, and that's what really put me off the book. What do you think about that? Because you read the first book in the Dresden Files, and you didn't read all of them. I read more than you did, but
yeah, it's kind of funny though, because I read a paperback cover that I borrowed from one of my friends, because he keeps talking about the Dresden Files. So I read it. You're right. I did not continue reading it because, frankly, I got bored, right? But the world that was built in that storyline was amazing. You have this regular world, really just normal real world that you see outside the window, but you have this underlying society of magic that's trying to stop other creatures to invade or to cause havoc in the real world, right? And the real world people knows about this, right? And that's a great world to start with. That's a great way to start a storyline. And to be honest with you, I was very excited about it, right? And the problem is with that is it feels like it's, as you said, you and my friend actually mentioned it can get very repetitive throughout the whole series, and it just did not become my thing because I don't like repetitive books, right? So I kind of like step away from that. The other one that I do want to talk to you about as well too is Ready Player One, the book, not the movie, the book. Ready Player One's world is similar to Harry Potter style world. You have the real world and you have the online world, right? And they live in this bigger world that they collide constantly, right? And you see the difference between the two worlds, but the main characters interact in both of them, and you can expand that to a really big world that's like exciting, right? Because again, that world feels realistic because we have our real life and we have the online world. Right.
Well, I mean, the Ready Player One. We're going to agree that we're dated enough that we understand Ready Player One more than more current generations because we grew up during those times. And so, if you make an '80s reference, we get it. We saw Back to the Future in the theater originally when it came out. So, that kind of stuff, right? And so the 80s references in there, when they discuss them, we get that world because we lived in that world. So the interesting thing about the book is that it pines about a time and nostalgia about a time that a newer generation falls in love with, which I would love for the newer generations to fall in love with the 80s because it was the best. We didn't have, the internet or whatever, but we had really cool stuff back then.
We walked around with music in our pockets.
We walked
before
around with
MP3s.
We walked around with city maps, bus schedules in our pockets and city maps. And God, it was, and pagers. Pagers.
I'm still trying to get a pager. Apparently, only first responders are allowed to have pagers now. But yeah, you know what I mean? Because you have this beautiful, I keep saying beautiful world. I gotta stop saying that. You have this world that's very relatable. That's why I said in the beginning that you have.
Sorry, I got too stuck in the 80s nostalgia. So I think the interesting thing about Ready Player One and the world building that they did was to discuss. It was discussion about multiple different societal questions about wealth, about how you live your life, about how people perceive life, about the values they put on various aspects, about human contact, which actually in this day and age is very relevant, where a lot of people spend time online. I mean, oh God, we're just going to go there again. In the 80s, we wanted to meet somebody, we would actually go and meet them in person and go on what's called a date. It's like, you didn't
what
get
is
to
that
swipe
called?
left or swipe right.
No, it's you're right though, because that's what I said in the beginning, that a world can be outrageous as much as possible, but if you don't have that anchor point, I'm calling it the anchor point of the reader's reality, that world can be nothing. It's like, that's what I'm saying. That's why the worlds of Harry Potter, The Expanse, Game of Thrones, what else? Ready Player One, all that. Even some aspect of Hail Mary, for example, has Hail Mary has something there too that really anchors back to our current reality, because it feels real, right? You can be all the way to the left field in your world, or to your, but there's something, if that world anchors you in today's reality, it feels real.
I think your point here is that you don't have to make it about some new fangled thing. It just has to be a good story in a real world that makes sense. Like when we talk about Andy Weir's books, Project Hail Mary and The Martian, a lot of people have seen The Martian. Maybe they haven't read Project Hail Mary, which we would highly recommend.
Highly recommend it.
So what we would say is that the character that you live in, you can see yourself in that world. And the same thing with Ready Player One. We can see ourselves living in that world. Well, we did live in that world. But it's interesting where newer generations, I wonder if they would see themselves living in the 80s. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe, and help others find this podcast by sharing a review. You can find us on all your favorite podcasting apps. Join us again right here where your bookmark left off.